The Jason Tate slow walk.
Okay, so
Here, is he?
we're going to follow up Freddie's great chat about Newsy with three, including Freddie. Sarah, who is a wonderful seller at AccuWeather, and Dennis, who just gave me an amazing tutorial over coffee on Insider and how Business Insider has transformed itself in many ways, including with some OTT. Lightning round. Do you subscribe to Hulu, Netflix, Amazon Prime?
All of them.
All of them.
I subscribe to Netflix, and my wife subscribes to about 700,000 other things. And she pays.
I'm one of 6, so we split a lot.
There we go. As the big players like AT&T and the Disneys work harder to own and build streaming businesses, are traditional media partners going to fight harder and harder for that share of eye, share of mind in the OTT space? How much more competition will that be for traditional publishers, do you think? Dennis?
It's going to be tremendous. I mean, we're all going after the same share of attention, and people only have so much time in a day. I think the big thing is we're spending now like 12 hours consuming media, like with multitasking, with media and tech and everything else. There's not enough time for all the brands that want to enter that space. So for brands like Business Insider, we have to have a unique value proposition for that audience to want to like consume that content. We have to stand for something. We have to be differentiated. We have to have a unique voice, and we have to be offering and paying the audience back with really good content. So I think it's going to be a challenge for us. Where our content is on there, it's ad supported, it's free for the consumer. I think it's going to be a challenge, as you mentioned, with all these other kind of like pay TV providers going back into getting into the OTT space with Warner Media and NBC Universal and everybody else that's about to enter the market in the next like 6 to 9 months.
Freddie?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I'd add to that is that you're right. Like at the end of the day, a pair of eyeballs can only be really looking at one thing at a time. On the big screen, but also what's needs to be remembered is that I don't remember the last time that I sat down in front of the TV and didn't have my phone in front of me. And so, you're right, like those 12 hours could be because it's 6 hours of being on your phone and 6 hours of watching telly kind of thing. Like there is a way to combine the two, and both of them are very valuable, and they're also very different things that require very different sort of experience for the consumer. But we do have to think about the fact that you are fighting for those minutes and that you can't share them with anybody else. And therefore, we have to give them a value prop that they can't get anywhere else. And for us, it was just about, as I said earlier, it's just about being anti-partisan, giving them something where they weren't being fed. And that's what you have to do. The quality of the content and what you bring has to be unique in the space. You can't just share or do something that someone else is already doing.
Sarah, in the pressure-packed craziness of RFPs and trying to be client solutions solvers for our advertising and marketing partners, I often have to calm my team down and tell them, okay, we're not curing cancer, we're not saving lives. In fact, AccuWeather saves lives. And you have a brand and a product that can be the difference between life, home, family, community, business. How great is that? How much different pressure is that for the quality of the content, for your selling process? Talk a little bit about how that roots and leads into the video product.
I think that's something that is this on? Oh, it is on. I think we're constantly talking about how it needs to be more relevant to our users, how our video needs to be. We're on your TV, we're on your computer, we're on your app, and the video we produce in each of those spaces needs to introduce so much about weather as part of everything you do. When you get up in the morning and when you're looking at what you need to wear, where you're going, what your commute's like, do I need to put my snow tires on? It's all about that, and I feel like video is lending itself to a really cool place for us because we can make really awesome content for advertisers around safety, around hurricane preparedness, around making sure that your car is ready we do really cool things with different apps for making sure that your car is up to date and if you're checking on things like that. And I think that's where we're really leaning into the video really hard on OTT particularly. But
That's great. Dennis, talk about how the bit you told me where a little bit of experimentation on YouTube led to a major strategic shift for Insider, and how that evolved and has fed into OTT as well.
Yeah, like across social. Like, so 3 years ago, if anyone's not familiar with the Insider brands, we have 22 different verticals, from Insider Food to Insider Travel to Insider Beauty, looking for that white space where we can have a unique voice and really kind of engage an audience. What we found by just kind of like looking at how we tell these stories, when people engage, we launched some videos that became Insider Food, and then out of that we did a cheese video, and we're like, oh, millions of views, people like cheese. And then we did another one, like, holy shit, people love cheese. And then we had Insider Cheese, and then we did a show that we distributed across, you know, as a Facebook Watch show originally, like the Great Cheese Hunt, and that's become like a really big hit for us. So it's like, what can you learn by just kind of like experimenting and trying to go deep on really kind of like specific topics that might surprise and delight an audience? And that's one of the things that we try to do. And again, it's always a continuous experimentation, tweaking things, evolving, and seeing what works, and how can you replicate those formats for other categories where you think that you actually have an authority to speak about it.
That's great. Freddie, I come from a magazine career, and I saw in April that Zinio has announced a Zinio TV OTT service for a whole host of magazines. At the very end of your chat, you touched on the differentiation between the content you were creating, or the strategy of content on desktop versus OTT. Could you unpack that a little further? Sorry, Eric, buzzword, unpack.
You gotta drop a couple.
Could you just stretch that out a little further? I'm very curious how us in content platforms, what do we have to charge our fellow colleagues with in terms of different thinking around the content?
It's in like sort of the different size of the screens that they're consuming it on, and the way that they're consuming it, right?
Well, you had a diverse mix of live,
Yeah.
long form, short form, series, et cetera, and how that content mix and palette shifted from desktop, and what did that take internally to achieve?
Yeah, well, I mean, it took millions of dollars. That's number one. We have a beautiful new studio in Chicago. Seriously, but the first thing it took was trial and error, an awful lot of trial and error. And I think that anyone who's in the video space can appreciate that and speak to that. And I like Insider Cheese.
Yeah.
Who knew, right? Like, that's the whole point, you know. And so what we did is we started feeding people content in all sorts of different ways and finding out what worked and what stuck. And you know, whether it was like, for example, you know, one of our top tips and secrets, as I'll tell you, that luckily no one's watching or recording this, is there's a really big difference between 82 seconds and 84 seconds. And who knew? Again, so you know, so initially we would provide people with an on-demand only business, and then we would give people a linear only opportunity, and then we would give them a bit of the both, and we'd find out sort of just, you know, where things went. But it created all sorts of problems within our bureaus. So you know, we've got 5 bureaus now across the country, about 200 staff producing our content, which is again a very different place to where we were 2-3 years ago. And as I said, it's expensive to do, but it's worth making the investment, because you can't try an idea with something shit. Like, it has to be good. You have to try something with content that is the type of content that you would then want to carry on giving them. So that's really the only way I could really sort of unpack that. And by the way, Marvel, dude, I had no idea you're a Marvel fan, Eric, but I'll tell you about some of my Marvel comics, but it's
Right.
Yeah, it's challenging, and as I said, it's expensive. But we did it by giving people a sort of a slew of all opportunities, and then just see where they start.
Sarah, AccuWeather is integrated into something like 200 TV stations, and in one manner or another, weather video feels like such it's not a leap. for your brand to be in video. It is the thing. How might you see it evolving to the benefit of both your audience and your marketing partners?
I think it's going to start evolving as oddly enough, we've been investing in a linear television network, which is a new thing for us, and I think that's become being able to sell that across multiple properties. You can see us on the TV, you can see video in the app, is becoming a really powerful sales tool, and I think there's obviously other weather vendors and opportunities, and we're not the only people in this space, but I think that is creating a really unique opportunity for us to be in so many screens is really powerful, and I think that's becoming like a really exciting new thing for us.
Dennis, in maybe Sarah's business, our brand, Fast Company, and yours, where Freddie's was organically, they just pivoted. They just said, we're going to be OTT. Mm-hmm. How do those of us who are many more things than just that one thing, how do we get there and get to success in OTT? And I'm going to take notes on your answer to this one.
Well, it's like I was talking with Freddie last night about this. There's a lot of experimentation. We're device agnostic. We run across all platforms. We think we need to be everywhere where our audience is. We want to inform and inspire, and we think that we have a unique voice, and that's why that's important to us. As far as being successful, I think that it does take promotion, and one of the things for like a publisher like ourselves, it's you can get a little lost in the shuffle. There's a lot of noise in OTT, especially if you ever go through whatever kind of like a connected device you have. If you ever go through kind of like the catalog of providers, I mean it's pretty long.
Can I just add to that actually and just say, yeah, I mean that's the biggest problem is assuming that you're going to be discovered on the big screen is a really terrible mistake, and it's
so how do you overcome that?
With money and by just being by having money, but also by
to grow audience, scale, promotion.
So having money to promote, having something unique that people want, and doing it well. And so the issue is that a lot of people went into the sort of the app ecosystem, let's say on Roku, which is a good example of this, thinking, oh, I'll just build an app and it's going to be as successful as the app on my phone. And the question they didn't ask themselves was how people consume on their phone versus on their sofa. The point is that on their phone, let's face it, most people are consuming content when they go and sit on the throne. And they're not, that's because they have this little opportunity to do whatever they want. When you get home, you're not doing that. When you turn on your TV and you put your feet up, we're all consumers as well. I think it's very easy for a publisher to forget that they're a consumer. And you think about, what would you do? You don't sit there and scroll through a bunch of apps. You find the one thing that you want and you're going to stick with it until you then go and cook dinner and set off the fire alarm, and then you move on to something else. Like, for example, I watch like a show of something before dinner, I then have dinner, and then I might pick a movie after dinner. Like it's a different thing, but you're not consuming multiple things. So discovery is a very serious problem because there are 4,000, 5,000 apps on Roku, and so it's not just about being there, and it's not about your audience just installing you and putting you where you want them to be, because even then they're still going to want something different. You've got to produce something that is in line with what they're going to do at that time of day.
So we're media properties, right? We're content creators. Will brands begin to develop their own OTT channels? Will OTT become the new website for them? How far can this go? And will we end up competing more for the eyeballs again against Target's OTT service?
I mean, it's only growing, and I think one of the best sort of discoveries that we came across is the replication of the desire to have a cable-like experience. So honestly, what I would actually suggest to anybody who wants to get into the space is look at the cable world and where that was 20 years ago, and imagine that as being OTT today. And it's only going to carry on along a similar path, a parallel path. And As to brands, I don't know. I don't think it's going to be where you go there to shop, but what brands will do is what brands were doing on cable 20 years ago. The only difference being one of the opportunities that's still being untapped is that the brands are going to be able to do a lot more targeting than they were. Like, this is not just about a DMA anymore. It's actually about knowing whose home you're going into. And I know that, I mean, we sell, as I said, like 10 or 15 million impressions a day, and some of our campaigns will run very broad, and some will serve 100 impressions. With a big budget behind it, but they get into the houses that they want, which is different to what exists in the cable sphere.
And just to jump, one of the things that we saw in the OTT space, I mean, we're doing about 3 billion video views a month, and OTT is a tiny, tiny sliver. And we're probably doing more on YouTube, OTT, and Amazon Prime than we're actually doing on our own app that we launched. So for us, it's really understanding what the expectation of the audience is when they go on the specific platforms. Because people go to the YouTube for a very different reason than they go to Facebook, and then a very different reason than they're going to go to OTT as well. So it's making sure that the content that you feel that holds up for that. So for YouTube, it's about discovery. It's about it's like the Google functionality of search and asking a question, getting a video that answers that question. That's what we focus in on that platform. Facebook is more about the entertainment. It's more about reactive. People just see things and cool things, and so we kind of like it. So it's really important to have that really kind of engaging hook shot, as we call it, that image. So it's understanding kind of like the ecosystem and like what kind of content fits best for which. So our B2B is going to be all of our Business Insider content, YouTube. We don't really.
When I was at Time Inc. and Sports Illustrated, we became a part owner of 120 Sports, which has evolved into Stadium. It's owned by Silver Chalice, Sinclair, MLB, BAM Tech has a piece, the NHL, PGA Tour is Nick involved in, 120, now Stadium. And they went all in with, I think it's something like 14 to 18 hours of live. And now classic games, live games, and it required an extraordinary commitment, and it only allowed Sports Illustrated to kind of say we're touching it. Fast Company 2 years ago launched OTT, and we're struggling to monetize. It's not our core strength, and yet we know. At the same time, I lived through the magazine world thinking the tablet was going to solve everything for us, and it was turned into a fiction. So how does this not turn into another tablet for brands like us versus those who are born of it, organic in it?
Well, my question to you is, are you struggling to monetize in the space because of a lack of supply, or because your people don't know how to sell it specifically?
Lack of scale, so that makes selling hard. Lack of resources to kind of fully commit to the platform. Those are some of the factors.
Yeah, but the reason I ask, and I'll stop taking up all the airtime here, but is because they're both problems, and people only want to buy in that space if you have a lot of scale, and we discovered that with Newsy Brief. We run Newsy Brief across a lot of publishing partners, and the people who give us a lot of scale are the people that we do the best with, and the people who don't are people who often get lost in the dust. But also it's about how to sell it. I mean, we have cycled through 2 entire sales teams learning how to direct sell OTT, and the biggest challenge that we have is the investment that's made in having to educate the buyer. It's surprisingly still such green territory for these people that the agencies and that lot, they still don't truly understand what it is, and as a result they don't even understand how it's being bought, how they're buying it, and they tend to shy away.
But Sarah and Dennis both have scale at their brands, enormous scale, but not in OTT yet, right? So right.
So how are you teaching the agencies? Like, who are you talking to? They're different teams. Sometimes I'll run into different, like, the same people don't buy banner ads that buy OTT. So I'm just they're disjointed, they're awkward email chains, and no one knows what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely a problem. I mean, how we teach, I mean, the first answer is like, 3 martini dinners. And
can I go?
yeah, hell. It's, I mean, so I don't work on the, I should mention, I don't work on the sales side of our business. I actually haven't sold a single impression in my life. I just produced the supply. But I sit, until I relocated to the Northwest, I used to sit 16 inches away from the people who do. And listening to the conversations they had, it was very clear that different agencies handle this whole thing very differently. Some people are getting people to represent everything, and other people have very, very siloed individuals who are trying to represent certain types of supply. And you have to be ready to have both types of conversations, as far as I can see, and be ready, therefore, to have to do 2-3 martini dinners if that's what's required. But it's only worth doing it if you do have the scale. I mean, but to be honest with you, it's also the one thing that we have also learned is it's not just about having tremendous scale, it's about having the right audience, and buyers really, really love that. And especially as we come up to another election cycle, which does very well for both our local properties at EW Scripps, but also for Newsy, is that the investments that are expected to be on the big screen and digitally are going to be very significant.
Are they asking to be like next to things contextually, or like how are you able to segment and target and break it all up that way?
No, they're not asking to be next to certain things contextually, because obviously, I mean, that's one thing to point out is it's actually incredibly hard to sell news. Especially, you know, I mean, we're not a particularly hard news brand, but it is very hard to sell news. No, they're asking to be just in very, very specific places, and they can't do that in a cable world, which is why their money is moving. You know, as far as cable's concerned, they can go to a specific DMA and that's it, but we can actually put them into a particular type of home with a particular type of user. There's a very different, like for example, an Apple TV streamer is very different to a Roku streamer. One of them spent $29, another one of them spent $150, and that's a different audience.
Steve, you look like you have a question.
I wanted to ask Sarah about the kinds of formats that you're playing with in the video platforms that you are playing in. Since you have content that could be very modular, but it could also go long. So I'm curious about where you're already playing in video and what formats you're thinking about it as you start moving into different screens.
As we move into digital streams, I think a lot of what we have right now is very short form, and that seems to be everything's 30 seconds, it's very quick, but it's also a lot of like public interest. We don't do a lot of our real-time weather reporting is not on our digital properties. That's something that's on our news, those are something that is on our linear television. A lot more of what we're finding that we're producing and working on our digital properties is, it's something like where we'd produce like a custom D-Day and how weather affected that, or we'd produce something custom for the storms in Puerto Rico, and those sort of like long-form segmentings are working much better on our digital properties because they can last for longer. They're repeat views, so it's just like it's a totally different conversation. And I think as I learn, because I didn't know anything about linear television, so it's interesting that so much you can't look at them the same, but we are learning a lot in both places.
Dennis, talk a little bit about how you at Insider, as the business and the strategy has expanded. The cheese example, for example, how Insider TV, how you're running series, you're running long form, short form, and how that's kind of just exploded opportunity-wise, and what it means to the business, to ad sales and more.
Well, it's provided us with a lot of like insights to what audience want. We're continuously looking at the data. It's all kind of like audience driven. We're there to serve our audience, and so we will kind of like play with the formats. And once we find formats, we make sure that they're repeatable. So can I take something that we did from Insider Cheese? Can I take that over to Business Insider and tell a story about an ETF? Possibly there's some warnings in there. Surprises the heck out of a lot of people, but possibly there's warnings. Is this on? One of the things I wanted to touch on, what you guys were just addressing, and I think Sarah hit the nail on the head of like on the buying side, because we're both from the sales side. One of the things that we did is we bundled all of our video. So we're doing 3 billion video views across all platforms. So we bundled that up. We call it Insider TV. You can buy across demos. You can buy across categories if it's like Insider Travel or Insider Food if we have the scale. And that's what we're taking to market. And the challenge initially was empowering the buyers. People would be like, OTT, that's my TV buyer. I'm just a digital buyer. And really kind of empowering them to be future-proof, because they're going to have to be able to buy this across all different platforms if they want to be relevant in the next like 5-10 years. 2 years.
Any questions?
Yeah. Do we have any final questions?
Brendan.
Yeah, Freddie, you mentioned some strong growth numbers over the last 2 or 3 years. I'm wondering for you and maybe for everyone else, of the OTT platforms, where are you seeing the most traction now? And then when you look in the immediate future, like where do you see the biggest opportunities for some of those platforms?
I'm actually incredibly pleased you asked that question because it leads to something really important. We started our existence on Roku and saw such growth there that we sort of stopped focusing on the others. And as a result, my job has been for the last 2 years is the one word thing that's written on my desk, which is diversification. So right now, today, I would argue, and I'd hate for them to know this, but like 90% of our business is conducted on Roku. They have done, as a business, a really unbelievably good job of giving people the experience that they want. And you know, with the launch of things like the Roku channel within Roku, which is also extremely smart, we also exist. So you know, so again, like I talk about diversification. There are two forms of diversification, and then I'll answer where we see the growth in the future, if I remember. It's both in an owned and operated capacity, but also as a channel, channel. So like a lot of people call apps channels, and that to me is just confusing, mainly because I'm quite stupid, but also because it's not a channel, it's an app. You have to treat an app like an app and treat a channel like a channel. And if you don't, then you're completely ignoring what it is that the customer is going to be doing themselves. So we launched a channel called Newsy Top Stories, and that is again another 24 hours linear stream that is extremely expensive to program, but exists on the Roku channel, Pluto TV, soon to be launching. We haven't signed, so obviously not allowed to tell you, but on places like TV Plus. And Samsung have done like again, that's a good example again of digital linear programming. The TV Plus has absolutely exploded in the last year, and their small team are running around with their hair on fire, unable to control the growth, and that to me is an interesting fact. So now to actually answer your question, Roku is where we still conduct most of our business. We have seen the most growth away from them on Fire TV, which again you have to respect is trying to create a very different type of experience for us consumer. So you have to factor that in and work that in and bring your content out with them in a way that means that you're going to be discovered. Which is again like it's an investment of time, and that's where we're seeing the most growth. The other places I forged over the last couple of years is alliances with every single OEM, and putting us on all of the different native television platforms as well, whether it's Samsung's Tizen or Vizio or Hisense and all those folks. And some of them are taking on quite nicely. I can see from our numbers that budget TVs is an interesting area of growth. Really fascinating. And the other reason why I think they're very smart people is because a lot of the premium TV makers, the glass makers, ignored, potentially I should say, they ignored the value of the fact that their TV was connected. They made it connected and then they didn't care. They just focused on investing in the quality of the glass. And now they're all really upset with themselves because someone came along and told people to put a $29 stick into their $2,000 TV that was already connected to the internet. And you know, they went, shit, like, why, like we've lost all that. And yeah, so some OEMs are growing, but particularly the budget ones, and in particular, in owned operated, Fire is our biggest area of growth right now.
Steve, should we wrap?
I think we do need to wrap.
Okay.
My lesson learned is we got to do this earlier in the summit next time. Guys, this was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yes.
We're gonna ping everybody to tune this one in in our video wrap that we do next week.
And then, not for inclusion on the internet, yesterday at golf, Nick, Anthony, and I approached the green on number 3, only to discover a severed head of a wild animal.
What?
We have photos of it. We need if there's a wildlife expert in the room, we need to identify what this animal actually was.
Put it on Newsy.
Yes.
Get it up.
It's Newsy worthy.
This is going to get a lot of impressions.
Okay.
Well,
Well,